Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zero Day Dispatch's monthly dialogue series. I'm Priya, the founder of Zero Day Dispatch, and I'm joined today by Rohana, our cyber policy research associate, and Irene Courtney, our community outreach coordinator. This strategic dialogue will focus on who defines identity, culture, and sovereignty in virtual spaces. Virtual worlds are becoming new arenas where power is negotiated through avatars, governance rules, and the control of digital economies. For low and middle income countries, this moment is critical. Earlier phases of the internet entrenched inequalities with infrastructure, platforms, and profits concentrated largely in the industrialized nations. Today, the metaverse risks repeating this cycle, potentially turning citizens of transitioning economies into passive consumers rather than co creators of digital futures. Yet, it also offers enormous opportunities. Smaller states, indigenous groups, and local innovators can use these new spaces to assert cultural representation and experiment with alternative governance models. Before we introduce our guest speakers to elaborate on who controls virtual worlds and digital identities, Rohana will outline some basic housekeeping rules for this session. Hello there, Rohana.
Welcome, everyone, and hi, Priya. Before we dive in, let me quickly run through some Zoom tips to help us have a great session together. This will be a 1 hour discussion. There will be 10 to 12 minutes allotted for our guest speakers. The last 15 minutes will be allocated to the audience for their questions. Please be aware that the session is being recorded, and by participating, you consent to being recorded. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. Only the speaker and the host will have their video on. Attendees can keep their video off or on. Please use the chat box to submit questions. We will address them during the Q&A session at the end. We recommend using Speaker View for the best experience. This recording will be submitted to various social media outlets, and it will be free of charge and for educational purposes only.
Thank you, Rohana. And now I'm delighted to introduce our first guest speaker. Stefan Bauschard is an educator, researcher, and strategist whose work explores the intersection of artificial intelligence, communication, and human representation in digital spaces. Drawing on his background in communication as a debate coach and as a curriculum designer, Bauschard investigates how emerging AI systems transform knowledge production, persuasion, and identity. His recent work focuses on synthetic realities, AI-generated environments that blur distinctions between human and machine expression, and the evolving ethics of digital representation. Welcome, Stefan.
Welcome. Thank you, Priya, and thank you so much for having me. And it's great to see everybody and to meet Kingsley. As you mentioned, I've become interested in the idea of synthetic realities. My initial background actually came in communication and rhetorical studies. I went to graduate school many years ago on that, and we studied a lot of how people are represented, persuasion, those types of things. Since I spent a lot of time in education, primarily in debate, and I got interested in AI because it really I thought a lot about how it's going to impact education. Obviously, it's had dramatic impacts. And the more I kind of worked on that, the more I learned, and the more I saw kind of the metaverse growing. Even before I got so interested in AI, I had taken a course on the metaverse, and we learned, how to build out kind of these digital representations in these very like complicated ways. And now it's easy to do with generative AI. So I think you'll really kind of see an explosion of synthetic realities. We already are to a degree, but in the presentation today, I'm going to draw a bit on some of that theory that I've gone back to from graduate school as I've kind of been exploring these issues. What came up, and in our initial discussion was the Albanian minister. I believe her name is pronounced Delia, and it's like we have a virtual minister of a country, and some of the initial kind of commentary on this was like, well, wait, but this person's like not appointed. They're not like a human. They haven't been democratically elected. And, I agree that that's an issue, but I'm also kind of interested in, how this individual is represented. And even yesterday when I went to go back and look up the exact name and prepare for this talk, I saw articles that she is pregnant and so to speak, and is giving birth to 83 offspring who will go on and kind of influence the government. So, this kind of brings questions of representation to the next level. And, I think one thing to think about, and I have some ideas. I actually just use a ChatGPT, but what does it mean, right? Just to think about when you see this person, right? They could have represented this person as anybody. When you see this as a woman with children and lots of children, what does that lead you to think about the minister, right? Imagine that this was an actual human. I don't think any human has ever had 83 children. I'd have to look in the Guinness Book of World Records, right? But we've had women, right, who have children, and that kind of creates like some thoughts, in our mind. And, I even asked GBT as soon as I started thinking of this issue. I didn't want to go too far, right? So it's like, oh, well, it could humanize the leadership, right? Depicts the minister as a mother, emphasizing empathy, care, right? It blends the personal and professional identities, right? They're really emphasizing this woman as having many children. Some women like a professional identity that separate from their families. Others choose to connect it. Men as well. It challenges stereotypes, right? That they're underrepresented in tech leadership, women in general, but especially mothers. They're trying to create a symbol of inclusivity for the government, and maybe the mother can symbolize nurturing growth. So, there's kind of all these kind of ideas that we get as soon as we see this person, really just a collection of math and representation, right? Could have been represented either way that kind of gives thoughts. And, just as a bit of contrast, what if they said this was our new minister? All right. Like what kind of representations does that lead you does that leave you with? And here's just a simple, I just asked Gemini to take a picture of a woman and generate a number of similar but different representations, right? And you could think through these like, oh, well, what I don't want to talk through them all right now, but like what does that kind of lead you to conclude? The cities, cities in a country, right? There's all different ways to represent them. And it can be the same, it can obviously be the same physical space, but these all lead you to see different things. So, and this is grounded in, and this is where I take myself back to my communication days. It was even before the metaverse. I went to grad school in the 90s, the late 90s. But people were started thinking about obviously the metaverse and what it would become, and we have other scholars studying the synthetic realities. A lot of work was written about the Gulf War and how the United States portrayed, Iraq and how we came to understand it. And there's kind of a certain there's like kind of four basic levels. And I'll share these slides. The viewers are welcome to see all the slides. I kind of won't talk through them all, but kind of at the micro level, right? You're feeling it. You're feeling like you're there, right? And you may feel and imagine yourself interacting with this Albanian minister, especially if you're in a fully kind of metaverse represented space. If you're wearing the headset, or we'll probably be able to do that through meta type glasses very soon, right? And then there's kind of this meta level, and this is before you get to the next level, where you kind of feel this connection, right? You get a deep immersion in the story that's really obviously highlighted, in the metaverse. There's effective realism. If it feels true, if you get this feeling, this emotional connection, it's believed to be true, right? We've seen this in, people getting very attached, even just to simple text chatbots, right? We have people, mostly men, but women as well, kind of marrying chatbots, right? So that's kind of an example of the effective realism, and then you get immersed in this national story. At the macro level, right, we have this social construction. We're obviously all part of kind of a shared practices or kind of a reality. And then when it's mediated, you get this repetition, right? We get exposed to it, and eventually we act as if it becomes real. We don't really distinguish. We kind of stop distinguishing the real the real from the not real. And I'll talk about that in a minute a little more when I talk about some of the theoretical grounding for this, and Baudrillard and some other scholars, right? I'm sure someone who, marries a chatbot believes that relationship is real as any relationship you or I have ever had, right? And then, then we get to the meta level, the hyper reality, fully networked. I'm talk about Baudrillard, how the simulation kind of replaces the real. It just kind of collapses, and then it kind of it kind of operates through the entire network. And we do get to the point where we have the, like I say, the metaverse, we have holograms. These things just obviously start to collapse. It doesn't even take a lot of theory to understand it happens. And, so these are just, I won't talk through them all, but, this is kind of some of the original founding work and, communication and related theory about how the worlds we understand them to be is kind of socially constructed. And there's just a simple book, The Social Construction of Reality, Communication and Power, the Media Equation. These are kind of all like theoretical foundations for this. The example I give, of course, graduate school, we had just come out of, Gulf War One, and then, 2003, we had Gulf War Two, right? So you all look much younger than me, so you probably don't remember all these things. But, even how Saddam Hussein was represented, right, as a terrorist, as a tyrant. I'm sure other people represented him is a leader, right? Sunnis probably portrayed him more positively, right? He wasn't didn't exist on his own, but the whole idea is that these things kind of become socially constructed. I mean, we're seeing it here in the West and in the U.S., right? All of a sudden, there are people who sell drugs. They're not just criminals anymore. They're terrorists. They're narco terrorists, and I guess and a criminal, they're entitled to due process. But I guess when somebody labels you a narco terrorist, they can just kind of blow up your boat, right? But that's kind of the some foundations here. And then this, some of the people really talking about media, you see, and especially Baudrillard and Deuze, and I'll talk about Baudrillard a little bit more in a second. There's a lot being written about this, and this is just kind of a simple thing here, right? So Baudrillard starts with the simulation, right? The process of representation. And you can almost say like, okay, well, the process of representation would, if there was a minister, right? Like, and now you have a digital representation of that individual. But then the copies, right? The simulacra, we have the copies or images, they no longer have original. They just kind of refer to other signs, other representations of the minister. And then we have the hyper reality and a state in which the simulated and the real merge, which is, a bit more even theoretical in the past. Now, as we've seen to the above example, it's just real. I mentioned people being falling in love with chatbots, influencers. They put that in scare quotes because on many of the social media platforms now we have influencers who are not even real people, but have millions of followers and sell millions of dollars worth of product. Politics may become performance. We see this especially in the U.S. I think that's why Democrats are struggling to deal with Trump a little bit. They kind of see, we imagine politics as this high area of argument and rational thinking, and obviously we know that emotions break that down. But I think that Trump has realized, knows who are helping him realize that politics has become a bit performative, right? So he even sends himself out on an airplane flying around, dumping feces on people, right? And people are like, well, this is crazy. It's not crazy if you're starting to see politics as performative, which also kind of underlies some of these emerging things we're seeing. So obviously, synthetic worlds shape, our national identity, right? How we're presented, right? Even just look at this. I asked Gemini to generate a virtual world, a metaverse, but with different countries, right? And this was the second time I did it. What's interesting, right? It puts the U.S. like way on the top of the tower. UK, it put some other countries. I don't know if that was all that intentional, but whether it was intentional or not, like imagine that kind of how that kind of reality, I was like, oh, I've created a metaverse image and, create these representations. And if you walk into the metaverse and you see the US at the top of the building, right? That impacts your reality. And nations are going to build virtual embassies. The metaverse people were really pushing the metaverse as far as they could, I think. it takes a lot to stitch together and make all these rooms, or it did before generative AI. But people were building, like, there was one where you could go in and you saw these universities there in the metaverse, and they had different representations of themselves, right? So as this becomes kind of mediated, people are going to build out virtual representations of their own countries and send their virtual ministers, right? So this is going to start to shape how we interact with each other. And, like I say earlier, all these reinforce each other, right? The sensory, the connection, then you have the network layer. And, here's another, it just kind of, this I didn't generate. This I asked Google Images to show me, for some images of a representation of the metaverse. And this was just like, I guess, libertarian. They wanted a libertarian governance structure. It's interesting to see, what's represented here. I mean, these figures look mostly male. It looks very well organized. It's like there's these people like having like this rational discussion. I don't know what they're doing. But just everybody watching this, you should take them and then just see like, well, what is this, uh, you know, to be? And I think to some degree, as societies were formed, exactly how they were built was probably more driven by like practical realities that emerged, right? If you read about the history of different cities and kind of how they end up roads being built and how neighborhoods kind of came to be and how different, like in New York, right? Like, different immigrant groups like settled in different parts of the city. And then, that obviously reinforced each other because, people feel comfortable with living with near people who are similar to them. Then, there's underlying kind of, discrimination and socioeconomic patterns. But those things are kind of built, through like kind of human interaction, right? They weren't like just designed from somebody on top, right? Even the mayors wish they had more control, but they don't, right? But if you're going to go design, who's designing these spaces? It's probably one person or a very limited number of people, and kind of what are they trying to communicate? And there's some other questions I'll kind of leave everyone with at the end, but it's almost like, well, what if you just got to design New York City from scratch, right? Like, what would it be? It's very, very powerful. So, I think it brings up a lot of questions. I won't talk through all of these, but how do we who's ever in charge of kind of these representations? And there's a blurred there, right? It's not like one person gets to decide, but and they evolve over the time, just like everything else. But how do we want to represent a country? We are going to have digital ministers and digital government employees. It's a bit shocking now, but how do we want to represent those people? There is the first AI in education presentation I ever did was at the Cottesmore School. It's in the UK, and then the person this was like in the spring 23, so this headmaster was like pretty aggressive. And then in the fall 23, he had a digital head teacher, which would help the teachers, strengthen their instruction. And it's interesting if you think about it in this context, because I mean, it's just an AI, right? I mean, we all have kind of digital assistants, right? Like whether you're just using ChatGPT or something specific for the purpose, but he decided to call it a digital head teacher. So this kind of made the news, right? All over the world. Like, what is that? What does that represent? He controlled that representation, right? In that case. What countries may lose control of their representations or have less control of their representations because they have less sovereign control over their AI. And even when they do represent themselves, imagine, they're going to be represented in other countries' AI systems in virtual worlds and ways that they may not be able to control. Now, obviously, too, this is a matter of degree. It's not like all or nothing. It's not like we've gone from this quote unquote real world to just jump into the metaverse, right? Like we've had things change over time. We've had print media, digital media, television, right? All these kind of things. Some initial flirtation with the metaverse, videos, right? So we kind of become conditioned to these things, right? So like, what's the change? How different is it? Than our existing realities. So, I don't, like I say, I don't want to walk through all these questions, but these are a number of questions that I think it raises. Who controls the filters? Who controls the models? It's a very important thing because battles, I actually meant to include the slide and I forgot. I talked when we talked initially, I brought this up. Yuval Harari, an Israeli historian, he talks about how there are conflicts that historical conflicts and wars are often over stories, right? That, and that actually takes us back. I was just talking about, visual representations, right, in media and, television and all that. But even before that, we had written stories. And of course, before that, we had oral stories, right? And a lot of the way when we grow up and we kind of understand the world, and even as we come into adulthood and live our lives, those understandings of the world are shaped by the stories, right? I mean, just look at global conflicts, right? I mean, they're shaped by a lot of hatred towards other people and dehumanization and all these types of things. And, one person's kind of telling this story, right? So he talks a lot about stories. And his point on AI, he talks a lot about AI, is that AI can now generate its own stories. And so that's kind of a unique thing, that we have AI kind of generating their own stories, but now we have AI also generating the representation. So, so those my final thoughts here are a little bit loosely connected, but there are just many questions that are related to representations and how much representations impact on the world. Is there really this difference anymore between what's real and kind of what's not real? Like, once we see these images enough and the sign represents the sign, this kind of all, it's easy to talk about like the metaverse is kind of some like fake reality or something like that, but it's just really another reality. And how is that going to kind of drive conflict and social conflict, interpersonal conflict, social conflict, religious conflict, conflict between nations and representations. So I've really got back interested in a lot of the theories in my graduate school days because I think they're now probably more important than ever. And I get that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Stefan.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for your wonderful conversation. Now we'll be moving on to our second guest speaker, that is Kingsley Owadara. Hopefully, I pronounced it rightly, but following on. So, Kingsley Owadara is an AI ethicist and a founder of Pan Africa Center for the AI Ethics. Kingsley's research and advisory work focus on promoting the responsible development, deployment, and use of technologies across African societies. His work focuses on promoting a human-centered approach to AI across its life cycle, from design and training to deployment and practical applications, specifically within the African context. So I'm leaving the floor open to you, Kingsley, for your talk.
I thank you very much for having me this past afternoon here, almost evening. Thank you all for having me. I'll just, see if I could share my slide. I had some little scramble so that we could follow, since I just have a very, very limited time to talk. But meanwhile, while I work on doing that, my work will be some sort of follow-up on what Stefan had presented, but I'll be looking at it from more of the Afrocentric perspective to Metaverse. And my take when it comes to technology is that, irrespective of whatever it is named, technology would always, remain technology. Please confirm if you can see my slide now.
Yes, we can see your slide.
Yeah. So irrespective of what it is labeled as, at first we had the Web 2, and now to Web 3. Then we started coming with the cryptos, cryptocurrencies, digital CBDCs, now to AI, quantum computing, and then also to the Metaverse. Irrespective of what we've tagged all this, the unique challenge that face Africa, the unique challenge that technology poses would always remain. But what it's really great is to understand what are these unique challenges, what are the opportunities that this technology brings on the table to make the world better, and how do we uniquely challenge it. My focus points for this presentation would just be on 5 core areas, which would be the data, digital ID, representation, connectivity, and ownership. When the metaverse became, something became a bit popular sometimes around 2022. Organizations looking at how they could really, leverage on the metaverse to get, to increase their productivity or to increase their sales. Many persons try to understand how the metaverse is, right? And irrespective of, how this has been adopted, the core challenge that has always been is the question of data. And I know that there are several proponents as to the different kind of type of metaverse, that have been postulated. Either you're going through the consumer metaverse, you're looking at the industrial metaverse, you're looking at the commercial metaverse. I mean, consumer as to gaming, commercial as to connectivity and business, and industrial as to probably building and so on. All this, how do they uniquely contribute to the economy and contribute to making the world better. But the first we really look at is data, and the question of data is two-sided. First, data tells stories, and most times we as humans are a product of stories. So most of the decisions we make are because you're told a story. You buy a product because probably you know the story behind the product. So it gives a lot of idea. It gives a lot of perspective to the metaverse. So just as Stefan was making this presentation, which I want to lay, I want to speak more on it, on the data. Who is how are these data being shaped, right? Where are this data that forms the foundation of the metaverse? How are they being approached? Looking at from African perspective, most of the data in Africa, unlike it is in the West, where you could actually, or in the global North, where you could actually check database, the histories, you could check, the cloud and find the data. Most times the data in Africa is lying somewhere in an office, or probably it is in the custodian of a community. So it makes it difficult to it makes it difficult to argue how representative metaverse is on the data. And secondly, moving to digital ID, how exactly do we represent? I saw Stefan did a lot of pictures on different women and color. But this became much interesting to me when I read particular research. I was having a conversation with a particular researcher, and I never knew that hair type was really a big thing until I started seeing research on avatars that do not truly represent the hairstyle, which is like the afro of so it's kind of afro hairstyle of Africans. And the fact is, if we are I think I'm relating the representation and the digital ID. So the fact is, how are this representation going on? And representation in this case, because these conversations are interwoven, right? The representation in this case is not even the air type, right? There are buildings, because the idea about metaverse is to have like a digital world that represents what's currently existing. So how are the buildings that are not in the cloud represented, right? Buildings that the architects, the metaverse engineers have never seen before, have never been to before. How are these buildings being represented? So it makes it a bit difficult. On the question of digital ID have been a serious conversation in the world. And the idea of metaverse and also the advancement of artificial intelligence could pose a serious issue on digital IDs. And one of the things that that this would bring, especially when we are referring to commercial metaverse, where there are interconnectivity of teams making meeting, their interconnectivity. So how do we handle the how are the issues of identity theft handled? That's the first. Also, how do we ensure, how are the data, the representation of the the members of the community, the African community that are not even on the internet, right? How are they being represented? Because if you look at looking at reports on penetration of mobile phones, penetration of smartphones, internet penetration, you'd really see that it will be really difficult to truly represent, truly represent, people here, right? And that's why this is a conversation where we could share thoughts on how do we perceive, connectivity and representation, especially for people that are not, that might not even be able to, use these technologies, right? Also, connectivity, metaverse. I mean, connectivity is a big deal when it comes to metaverse. Connectivity in the sense that you are able to connect to people in the digital world, right? But in this case, I'm even looking at it from the kind of connectivity that are prevalent here. All over the world, you could see discussions on 5Gs and series of cloud-based connectivity. But the story is quite different here. Looking at some areas in Africa, and I would not mention specific places where they are still struggling with internet connectivity. So it makes it a bit difficult to really truly represent people in those areas, because for you to get, I mean, you're talking about people that that are not even they are not even with smartphones, talk more of getting connected to the internet, and also getting jumping on emerging technology. And the uniqueness of this is reason why organizations offering SME related solutions would are always thriving, right? Because that's the uniqueness of most of the communities over here, right, in Africa. But then look at ownership. How do we what are the perception of ownership? And this ownership is deeply rooted in some sort of politics, politics of technology. Ownership in the sense that how I refer to first questions on platform accountability. I know that this has been series of conversations that have been discussed right from the days of Web 2 and also right where we are right now on the internet, where we're looking at how do you make platform to be accountable to data, how a platform be accountable to intellectual property, because people are creating things, our platform accountable for intellectual property. And then there's also this politics between platform and government, and these are evidenced by series of issues between competition, competition, consumer commissions, and some big techs, right? Try to understand who controls the platform. And if you look at, if you read some of the stories in some of countries in Africa, you would see issues. You see first issues on platform shutdown. You see on internet shutdown. You'd see on even mandating organizations to have physical office here because of tussle of control. But then you also have another phase, another side of control would be how are we not, I mean, the interoperability of metaverse, is it not, giving more control to platforms, because you are taking a lot of data, unlike the internet, where data could be probably data that you release, probably you are working on, let's say the social media where you could probably use the first name, your last name, a series of events, and that could be the end of it. But in case of metaverse, it's a bit different. We are your emotions, your eye movements, I mean, the entirety of you is being captured. Then that means that if you're not careful, there's likelihood that technology is now controlling humans and not humans really using technology. Also, Some of the challenges I also see when it comes to the adoption and also the reality of the metaverse could be the issue of first starting with the price of the hardware, right? The economies of worlds are different, so as the affordability of things are different. So how do organizations, let's even cascade a bit from individuals to organizations, how many organizations, have what it takes to maintain a virtual office? Talk more of moving now the office productivity to the metaverse. How many organizations could, and I'll talk more about this when it comes to when I'm talking about infrastructure. How many organizations are able to build, infrastructure that could be are able to own infrastructure that could build, metaverse that could help either for gaming, for connectivity, for any purpose? How is it being done? And then on interoperability, I see it also a very, very serious challenge, because this time around you're trying to move people from where they are into the metaverse. So how do you uniquely move people from where from the current reality on technology to the metaverse? This is a bit difficult because, and not just that, when I mean, don't just that, when I move people, I think some organizations started doing it gradually, where they started, coming up with avatars. I think at a point, Zoom, added to where you could really use an avatar to represent you in a meeting, and whatever you're doing, the avatars, is representing you. But most times it could really be difficult to operationalize interoperability of the metaverse. On the content economy, one of the things that have really made youth thrive in Africa is content economy and creator economy. You see many people getting on YouTube, getting on Instagram, creating content and getting series of impression. And it's a bit difficult because there would need to be some sort of clear distinction on what exactly is the policy that relates to content moderation, and also how do we navigate the content and monetization of content. And then on infrastructure, I think I did mention a bit about it on how are this infrastructure buildable, in quotes, right? And how many could own such infrastructure? But then safety, privacy, and governance. Privacy first. Privacy is a big deal. And if you look at currently all over Africa, out of 54 countries, over 36 thereabouts have, a data protection regulation. That makes it difficult, because how do you operationalize, privacy when there's no rule or no regulation that is governing privacy? It means that there's likely to have, prevalence of identity theft, to have even capturing of data, and the idea of the challenge of data privacy have been a big deal, in Africa. So how do you how can it be done? And then on safety now, not just safety as to the safety of the wearable device, but safety as to even the people that are using it. Safety would be questions on age verification of infants, because of malicious users that could really use that to get them. I think I was reading a research, because I was working on something like this around 2022, and I was reading a research, on crimes and vices on the metaverse, and about a particular research where somebody was, claiming rape, was being raped on the metaverse, and those are a series of legal issues that while some can look at it that you are joking, but it could really be a serious thing for the person that is, saying such comments. So what are the things in place to make content specific, safety as to age group, genders, because we cannot overlook, we could not just overlook that as not being important. Age groups or age grade, gender, people from different backgrounds, and people with different needs, and then the governance of the platform itself. We are in a world, in a time where a lot of technologies are coming up, and governance is trying to catch up with technology. But the metaverse, while not really a new technology that started this year, it's something that I've been that has ongoing conversations right before now. But what are the structures in place to ensure that this technology is really being governed and to enable more persons, more organizations to get in it and choose better. So I'll take a pause here of my presentation so that we could have the questions and also the discussions.
Thank you. That was really, really very illuminating. And I think the contrast with Stefan's talk was also, I think, something to think about. So are there any questions that Stefan would like to ask Kingsley and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it kind of brings up, I was kind of talking about like how you'd want to how you could choose to represent yourself, how much you can choose it, and Kingsley's bringing up a lot of like, well, does Africa even have the opportunity to represent itself, given the lack of kind of AI infrastructure and the sovereign AI control over its own systems? I was looking here. I'll put the link in the chat. There's I listened to a talk. It was an interview talk, but three of the most influential people and AI. One of which is Fei Li. She's called the godmother of AI. She created the original ImageNet competition. And, she made a couple comments in there. One was that, okay, we're all, she's building a virtual worlds. She created a virtual worlds company really to train models. But it essentially would also allow the creation of pretty rich metaverse environments, right? And she makes a couple comments. One is like, yes, we're going to live in these realities, inside these synthetic realities, which is kind of the broader purpose of, broader idea of what we've been talking about. But then they were talking about different, somebody asked like, well, should every country like have their own, AI systems? And there's Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, said, well, ideally. But the reality is that, the US, with all the capital investment and has the most advanced systems, China, there's a debate how if China's behind, how far behind all that, but they're clearly the leaders, right? And then, the Gulf countries that have a lot of revenue resources, right? And are investing in these systems, collaborating on these systems. But she said the continent she's really worried about is Africa, because they don't have the resources to they don't have the financial resources to build their own models. They don't really have enough financial resources to collaborate. They do have a lot of rare earth minerals that people want that might give them some leverage. But she kind of said she's fearful they're just going to be left out, right? We talk about all this democratization of technologies, which kind of happens. But Peter Diamandis, who's like, he believes this is going to lead to global abundance. He's like, all you need is a smartphone and an internet connection, and you can access some things. And that's true. I mean, you can get a little bit with a really low level smartphone and a little bit of internet, but and obviously some places of the world they don't even have that, or where they have it's very limited. And obviously synthetic realities are very kind of both bandwidth intensive and token generation intensive, right? So that's not going to be everywhere, right? So I don't know if it's a question, but it kind of leads me to, do we want to be represented? How do we want represented? Maybe some places will be better off just kind of being left alone, right? Like why does everyone has to get pushed into Western synthetic realities? I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, maybe the question is, have you thought of that? Like, what is this something everybody wants to be a part of? Or maybe some people luck out, they don't have the resources to be part of it. It sounds bad, but it might be good. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kingsley?
Yeah, representation in, as I've mentioned, technology generally has been a big deal. And this is because it's not a technology issue. Representation is not a technology issue. It's more of a human issue. And why I think it's human in nature is because I can take a full jottings of this, session in a notebook. If I don't make it available to people, let's say we don't have recordings, if I don't, make it available to people, they would only know that there was a session, but not the details of the session. And that's exactly what happens in representation. People that needs to be represented, they know their self. They know the difference between a person from Ghana to a person from the US, sorry, a person from Mali. I mean, they know all those people, they have a way they represent them. But a person in Silicon Valley might not totally understand, might just feel that, okay, these people look alike, so let us generalize them. So the issue has always been how these who exactly is building. So knowing who exactly is building the metaverse could really help to understand representation, because the first would be availability of data. But most times you could have the data to even build a metaverse, but you as a builder might not even understand how to rightly classify the data. So it makes it a bigger scramble. So that what technology just does is that technology just just widens it, just announces the most, and then we begin to see it. So one of the ways I feel that the representation could really be sorted out would be to not just allow people to tell their stories themselves, but also to allow people amidst them to be able to interpret the story to the world. So that really helps for people to understand that, okay, if I want to understand XYZ group of people and properly represent them, I could get this person, I could get here and find it. So it's not really a technology thing, it's a people thing. And that's really the thought, on my head.
Thank you.
And then I was also thinking, when it comes to representation is not just as it relates to people. I mean, humans. Representation also, relates to locations, right? Locations, memories, history, and so on. Because one of the proponents of the proponents of metaverse is that they want people to be able to relate to historical facts, to be able to not just walk, but to understand what happened in history, how did it happen, which representation is a big deal, right? Also for people to be able to build build space. For instance, if I want to visit let's say Egypt, and I want to visit the one of the seven wonders of the world, I could just probably get into the metaverse and also visit them. So I'm really thinking that there's actually the principle that was adopted, in the aerospace and also in law, that they say that whoever owns the land owns whatever is beneath the land and owns whatever is on the land. So in the metaverse, how do we talk about ownership? So if for instance, Kilimanjaro is a mountain and it is resident somewhere in the world, and a particular country, a particular company is building, let's say, a metaverse that could help to retrace history. How do we handle ownership in that instance? Do we talk about creativity? Would ownership be accredited to creativity? Would it be accredited to the original owners of the artifact? But I mean, I just want to get your thoughts. What are your thoughts about that? You are muted.
Yeah. I think I agree, and I ended up talking about people, but it's also the way, I had the short slide about the cities, but it's how we represent not just people, but locations, governance structures, right? The role of, like, what is the role of this person, right? Like, I guess, in Albania, there is kind of a process, in the US, I mean, you basically, like, you elect the president, and then the president kind of suggests the equivalent of ministers, and it's mostly a rubber stamp unless the person is, like, extremely bad for some reason, but there's a process through which somebody kind of becomes a minister that is at least somewhat democratic, right? At least represented. But what happens, right, in this situation, and so that's a kind of a little bit about the person, and I talked about that, but then how does that represent your government, right? Like, what representations the government have, even the mountain, right? You talked about, right? That Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, there's kind of different ways to represent that, right? I'm sure there's parts of it are beautiful, parts of it are not, parts of it are, habitated, parts are not, right? Like, what, what role does it play in the history of the country, right? And these have all, like I say, been questions in the past that way. We've had different representations in the world in history books and encyclopedias and all those types of things, but it kind of adds a different component when it's a visual and then when it's immersive. And nobody really thought to say, well, I want to build this whole other world the way, we're represented or not represented in the encyclopedia. There've always been dual narratives, but there's never been whole other worlds, right? Like now, maybe if, you're a resident of one of these countries and you need something, you'll pop into the metaverse and you'll go to the virtual minister's office, right? And they'll talk to you. I mean, and what's the difference between that and typing a text in a chat GPT? Functionally, not really. I mean, it's more of the interface, right? Maybe the interface, think of the interface as the metaverse is an interface, right, to the world, right, to AI, just as the way, okay, a chatbot's an interface. Now we have web browsers that are, agentic. Their interfaces will interface with AIs through robots. And maybe the metaverse is just another interface, but those interfaces create different realities. And yeah, I agree. It's beyond people.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I am also thinking about, because as part of also representation is being able to emotionally connect to things. And emotions, recently emotional data became a thing where, I mean, you could really, I mean, there are contentions as to emotional data, because you want to be able to understand if a person think about pizza, you should see an ads of pizza advert, right? And the person is thinking about being overwhelmed. You could see like a Netflix movie recommendation, that could really get a person, out of that space. So what are your thoughts, when it comes to taking advantage of emotions, monetizing emotions, emotional data? And I know that, in the EU, there are a series of, restrictions as to data usage and so on. But, the rest of the world that are not so firm about, or no pronounced thing about, such. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's happening, and I think people don't realize how much it's being done. Some other related research I did back in the fall, and it wasn't original research. I just kind of looked at all the research that's been published, and in a digital space, most people say AIs are more persuasive than people. And the basic idea is, if I was interacting with you or a chatbot and I didn't know, the one was real and one was not, they're both just digital representations. The digital representative would be way more persuasive, way more likely to persuade me because it knows more about me. It can pick up on the nuances of my facial reactions, all these really small things, like way faster than a human can, right? So it's more persuasive. Yuval, who already talked about earlier, talks about how intimacy is, the most persuasive power. And then you could define that in different ways, physical intimacy or whatever, but he's really just talking about a strong interpersonal connection. So they can build that with you. They obviously have, I wrote a blog about this the other day. People are talking to these chatbots about everything. Right. They know, many people, they know all their hopes and fears, their dreams, their insecurities, their problems, their, interpersonal problems, financial problems, like everything. People are telling these chatbots about everything. It's like more consumer data than I mean, I would kind of started my blog with saying, imagine Walmart called you up and said, hey, just literally tell me everything about you. Right. And they know that. And of course they can use that. They can use that to market. Is it good or bad? I mean, I don't know. It's a reality. I think even, okay, the EU is putting restraints on this. Okay, I mean, yeah, you can restrain it some. You can only restrain it so much, and these systems are kind of transnational. And I mean, it's okay. But I mean, we've always done this, right? We've there's Coca-Cola. They try to get people addicted. They are to caffeine, coffees, tobacco. I mean, it's a different form of kind of persuasion. It's like you have to use our product, you're going to get a bad headache. But you know, you could look at it as just more marketing. You could use a little more manipulation. I think people get more nervous when it gets into politics, because politicians have always been persuading us. I mean, everyone has their side of the story, so to speak, right? I mean, again, these things are all not brand new. They're kind of hyper scaled, right? And the quality of them is kind of shocking, right? There's never been something that could be more intimate with you than like in any way than a person, right? I mean, maybe somebody got attached to their pet, right? But other than that, the closest intimacy based on any definition has been person to person. And now that's no longer the case. It's person to machine, right? So yeah, I think it'll have a pretty big impact. And then you look at kind of who controls those machines, like you were talking about. So yeah, I mean, there are probably some things that are going to happen that aren't going to be good. As have happened when other stories were told. I don't mean to downplay it, but I just kind of we're not going to stop it. We can try to counter it a little bit. We just finished a book on pluralism, AI pluralism, and the idea that you can have different values in different AI systems that can be represented essentially through different agents, and you can change the beliefs. They'll change each other's beliefs by altering their weights and stuff like that. And I think everybody's going to want a digital companion that looks out for them, because otherwise you're just not going to you can't. It's like every kid needs an adult to look out for them because they don't understand the whole world around them and the context and how they can be manipulated and take advantage of. I think we're all going to need an AI to protect us from other AIs the same way a child needs a parent. I mean, it sounds bad. It puts us in a weaker position, but it is a reality.
Well, this has been an incredibly enlightening discussion. I think that both our speakers have left us with not just a lot of questions, but also different ways on how different parts of the world perceive identity, representation, data, etc. I just like to thank both these incredible minds actually for sharing their expertise. And unfortunately, though, due to time constraints, we aren't able to explore every aspect of the topic. However, the depth and quality of today's discussion was remarkable. Thank you again to our panelists and to the Zero Day Dispatch team. Remember, you can stay connected with us through our website, newsletter, our LinkedIn page, Slack, and all these different social media platforms that we're on, all of which I've added to our chat. And we really look forward to continuing these crucial conversations. So until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to meet you all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
What a wonderful conversation.